I would like to begin the class by quoting a couple of lines from John Milton's Lycidas. I studied Lycidas when I was an undergraduate and I enjoyed it immensely. And it has remained one of my favorite poems. Please don't say that I am obsessed with Lycidas. It always helps if the student can refer to, if the student can establish a parallelism with, if the student can quote from works which are comparable to the work in hand. This is what Milton says in Lycidas. I quote, "For Lycidas is dead, dead ere his prime, young Lycidas, and hath not left his peer." Unquote. I shall repeat the passage. For Lycidas is dead, dead ere his prime, young Lycidas, and hath not left his peer. Lycidas is, of course, Edward King, Milton's friend at Cambridge, who drowned to death when his ship sank in the Irish Sea off the coast of Wales. But if you read this passage carefully, you are bound to come to the conclusion that everything that is said in the passage is as much applicable to Arthur Henry Hallam as to Edward King. For Lycidas is dead, dead ere his prime. That is the first line. Precisely what happened to Hallam. He died ere his prime. He died before his prime. Young Lycidas. Hallam died young. And there is a Greek saying, those whom the gods love die young. Young Lycidas, and hath not left his peer. Peer in this context means equal. I think it is even more true of Hallam than it was of Edward King. Hallam was without a peer. Hallam was handsome. Hallam was friendly. Hallam was an extrovert. Hallam was well read, well informed. Hallam was charming. Hallam was a good conversationalist. Hallam was a budding poet. Hallam was a good student. Hallam was a well-traveled man. I can go on and on. So everything that is said in the Milton passage, everything that is said in the Lycidas passage is perfectly applicable to Hallam, whose death is lamented in Memoriam A.H.H. by Lord Tennyson. In Canto 61, Hallam has become a spirit. He is now in a sort of intermediate stage between earthly life and life after death. He is interacting with saints and wise men. They are bound to be impressed by him because he is a perfect specimen of humanity. While interacting with the saints, suppose he were to look down on earth and look at the poet, he is sure to feel that the poet is someone very inferior. The poet is someone who is a dwarf in size intellectual, spiritual, moral, especially while interacting with saints and wise men. This is precisely what Hallam would feel if he were to look down on the earth and look at the poet. In the closing stanza, the poet declares that, be that as it may, he loved Hallam. I loved thee, spirit. I loved thee, spirit, and nor can the soul of Shakespeare love thee more. Nor can the soul of Shakespeare love thee more. Tennyson loved Hallam as only Tennyson could love Hallam. Nobody could love Hallam more. And Hallam is now a spirit. I love thee, spirit. And the poet says that the soul of Shakespeare could not love Hallam more than Tennyson loved him. Why Shakespeare? This is a subject, this is a topic which demands detailed investigation, and there is no space here, there is no time here for that. However, I shall say a couple of things. One is, Tennyson was a very systematic, a very diligent student of English literature. He was a great admirer of Shakespeare, and this is reflected in the closing line of the canto. The second point is that no poet, at least no English poet, no English dramatist, no English writer has written so much about love as Shakespeare. Shakespeare has written more about love than any other English author. That is why the poet says that he loved Hallam, and not even the soul of Shakespeare could love Hallam more than he did. You must remember that Hallam is now a spirit. He is in the intermediate stage. He is interacting with saints, with wise men. In Canto 62, the poet says that if Hallam looks down on the earth and sees the poet, he might find the poet very inferior, not just to the, perhaps not just to the saints, to the wise men with whom he is interacting, but inferior to himself. The poet says that he might feel like a man who has a romantic relationship with a girl intellectually inferior to him. The romance comes to an end. The man falls in love a second time, this time with a woman who is of equal mind, and he marries her but lives to wed an equal mind. But lives to wed an equal mind. And the first romance, the first attachment with the woman with the inferior mind is now at the most worth a passing smile, is a matter for a flying smile. The parallelism is established between Hallam, who once loved Tennyson very much, now feeling ashamed of his friendship with Tennyson, who is intellectually very poor, intellectually a dwarf, intellectually a pygmy, and the man who marries a woman who is intellectually equal to him, but who had a romance with a woman intellectually inferior to him earlier, and the first relationship is now worth only a passing smile. This is something I keep on repeating. Victorian society was a society of rigid caste distinctions. Sorry, rigid class distinctions. Caste is too strong a word for Victorian society. And the classes were not only on the basis of wealth, not only on the basis of blood, but also on the basis of intellect. The aristocrats looked down upon the riffraff. The rich looked down upon the poor. And the intellectuals looked down upon the unread, the illiterate. And it is this rigidity of the Victorian class system which is clearly reflected in this canto. In Canto 63, we find that Hallam is now in a higher sphere and the poet is now in a lower sphere. And Hallam may feel that his love for the poet, Hallam occupying a higher sphere and the poet existing in a lower sphere, Hallam may feel that his love for the poet may be a hindrance to his higher aspirations. The poet works out a comparison between himself and a horse, himself and a hound. Just as the master loves the horse, just as the master loves the dog, the master loves the hound, Hallam can love Tennyson. The master's love for his animal does not in any way act as a hindrance to his spiritual aspirations. Similarly, Hallam can love Tennyson and find that the relationship is no hindrance to his spiritual aspirations. This canto mentions the horse and the hound. The horse and the dog were the two most important domesticated animals in Victorian society. The horse and the hound played a key role in the lives of the Victorians, especially the Victorian aristocrats. The Victorian aristocrats had a passion for hunting, and in hunting both the horse and the hound was used. In Canto 64, the poet wonders whether Hallam looks back on his days on earth, whether Hallam looks down on this earth where the poet is sighted from the heights that he now occupies. The poet presents the narrative of a man born under extremely ordinary circumstances, who through his efforts and through good fortune rises higher and higher until he clutches the golden keys, until he becomes a great statesman, an advisor to the ruler, the center of a world's desire. Such a man, now occupying the highest, one of the highest offices of state, may have tender feelings for his beginnings, may hold his early days, the humble beginnings of his life dear. Such a man may have kind thoughts for a friend of his with whom he shared his early days and who has been unable to break free from the humble circumstances in which both began their lives. The friend who continues to lead a humble life in his village wonders whether his old friend remembers him, his old friend who is now a great statesman, a very powerful figure, who is now the center of a world's desire. The poet says that Hallam, presently occupying celestial heights, presently occupying spiritual heights, may look at him, may look at the poet, the way in which the great statesman looks at his old friend with whom he had shared the humble beginnings of life. This canto, like several others in the poem, provides us with a glimpse of Victorian society, which was very much a society of classes and masses. The distance between the great and the low, between the powerful and the poor, was tremendous. And it is this distance which is alluded to in the poem. Alluded to in the canto of the poem. In Canto 65, the poet says that friendship is something very precious, something very precious, and so he cherishes every grain of it. Tennyson and Hallam were friends. The effect of Hallam on Tennyson has been remarkable. The influence of Hallam on Tennyson has been extraordinary. Hence, it can be concluded, reasonably concluded, that there would have been some effect of Tennyson on Hallam, that some influence of Tennyson would have lingered on Hallam, and the same would inspire Hallam to do noble deeds. I am reminded of a quotation from the Bible, Proverbs 27:9. I quote, "A sweet friendship refreshes the soul," unquote. I repeat, a sweet friendship refreshes the soul. If you find yourself annotating any passage from In Memoriam A.H.H, similar to the lines in this canto, you can most certainly use this beautiful quotation from the Bible in the comment paragraph of your annotation. How come the poet has become so happy? How come the poet has shaken off his melancholy and become so gay? Canto 66 provides the answer. The poet is like a blind man who needs a hand to lead him, who cannot move about on his own, who needs to be guided in order to move about. But the blind man jests with his friends, takes children on his knee, plays with them. He dreams of the sky he can no longer see. The point is that the inner day of the blind man can never die. The night of loss is always there, but the blind man roams in a world of his own, where the night of vision and the day of thought can never change. In Canto 67, the moonlight falls on the bed of the poet. The same moonlight must be falling on the tomb of Hallam in St. Andrew's Church, Clevedon, Somerset. The name of Hallam, the years, the year of his birth, followed by the year of his death, they gleam in the moonlight. The mystic glory swims away. The moonlight dies. The poet goes to sleep. The poet sleeps until next morning. Day breaks from coast to coast, from the coast of Somersetshire to the coast of Wales, across the Bristol Channel. And again the poet's mind goes to the tomb of Hallam, which in the dark church glimmers in the dawn. We get a glimpse of the Victorian tendency to fetishize the dead in this canto. Perhaps the supreme example of the tendency was provided by Queen Victoria herself when her husband, Prince Albert, when the Prince Consort died at the age of 42, Victoria went into mourning, and the mourning continued till her death. And throughout her long life as a widow, she wore nothing but black. Canto 68 is the dream canto. The poet goes to sleep. Sleep overwhelms the poet, and sleep is death's own brother. However, though sleep is death's own brother, sleep cannot bring Hallam back to life. In his sleep, the poet dreams. He dreams that he walks as if he has not lost Hallam. He walks ere I walked forlorn. He walks as he used to walk before he lost Hallam. He walks with Hallam. However, Hallam is not happy. The poet finds a trouble in his eye. The poet wonders what is the reason for the expression of sadness on the face of Hallam. The poet is unable to identify the reason. Next morning, the poet wakes up, and the poet understands the truth. In his sleep, in his dream, the poet had transferred his own trouble, the trouble of my youth, to Hallam. Sleep, dream, had caused the confusion. The sadness of the poet was transferred in his sleep, in his dream, to Hallam. Canto 69 continues the dream motif. Canto 69 is also a dream canto. The poet dreams that nature has become distorted. There is spring no more. Instead of spring, the streets of the town are black with smoke and frost. They are filled with the chatter of hawkers. The poet walks into a wood. He finds a thorny bough. He takes the thorns and makes a crown for himself. Everyone laughs at him. Everyone scoffs at him. The young and the old, they mock him for wearing a crown of thorns. Finally, an angel of the night arrives. He tries to console the poet. He looked upon my crown and smiled. That is what the poet says. The angel of the night touches the crown, and the crown of thorns suddenly becomes a crown of leaves. The thorn crown becomes a leaf crown. The angel speaks to him, but the poet is not able to understand what the angel of the night says. The symbolism of this canto is rather difficult to unravel. I shall try to offer an interpretation. If you can provide a better interpretation, a more convincing interpretation, well and good. The poet's point is that he is undergoing intense suffering. As a result of Hallam's death, as a result of the fact that Hallam has been taken away from him, the poet tries to work out a comparison between his extremely intense suffering and the suffering of Jesus before his crucifixion. Jesus underwent his famous agony in the garden in Gethsemane. Jesus was crowned with thorns. Jesus was adorned with a crown of thorns when he was taken to be crucified. Something very similar has happened to the poet. But the angel of the night arrives. Is it an angel sent by God? Or is it God himself? The angel of the night touches the crown. The angel of the night offers comfort to the poet who has been scorned by the world, the poet who has been mocked by the world. The angel of the night touches the crown of thorns, and the crown of thorns becomes a crown of leaves. Probably the leaf crown is a laurel crown. In the classical world, great achievers were rewarded, were honored with laurel crowns. And you have statues of Dante. You have paintings in which Dante is shown as wearing a crown of laurels. Perhaps the poet wants to convey the fact that his suffering, his intense suffering, His suffering, which is even comparable to the agony of Jesus in Gethsemane, has not been in vain. It has resulted in the creation of In Memoriam A.H.H and has made him a famous poet. It has won for him a crown of laurels. What started as a thorn crown has now become a leaf crown, a laurel crown. Canto 70 is also a dream canto. The poet wants to look at the face of Hallam. He tries to do that, but he fails. I cannot see the features right. That is what he says. He endeavors to get a clear image in his mind of his friend's face, but he is unable to see his friend's face clearly. Instead, he sees an amorphous collection of unrelated objects, blurred images, shadowy forms that look like crowds, houses, thoroughfares of a ghost town. The poet is frustrated, so he takes a tremendous effort. He makes a tremendous effort to capture the face of his friend clearly in his mind. And finally, he succeeds. Looks thy fair face and makes it still. I repeat the line. Looks thy fair face and makes it still. The poet is able to see the beautiful face of Hallam clearly. And this sight, this vision, this glimpse offers consolation to the poet, offers solace to the poet, offers comfort to the poet, and the poet's mind becomes still.